This is called Someone Has Died, as written by Lonnie Russo. Someone has died. Of this I am certain. I know it because I always know it. As I lie here alone in this big, empty bed and listen to the rain, I remember it as it returns to me. This feeling, this dread, skittering up and down my throat. With 1,000 little legs, it settles in my stomach like a great stone. A solid, sickening weight. It is rancid in its heaviness and unmistakable in its familiarity. Someone has died. I do not know who. I sit up and I take a long breath, pulling my legs out from beneath the covers so they can dangle above the hardwood, cold where I press my feet. The remains of chipped red polish color my toes. I had intended to paint them this week, but I cannot choose a color. I have been told that I am bad at making decisions, too nervous to choose the wrong one. But I do not think that is true. Someone else has simply always been there to make them on my own behalf, but I will make one now. I will call my daughter, I think. I move for the end table to retrieve my glasses. They sit crooked on my nose, and I push them back into place as I look at my cell phone, plugged into the wall there. I wait for it to ring. I stare. I expect it, but it does not. I had told my husband at one time that we should keep the landlines, one in the kitchen and one in the bedroom, for hurricanes or when the power goes out. But there was no point, he had decided. No point when we had a family plan, which was expensive. But sitting here now, maybe there was a point. I think, and maybe I had not insisted hard enough. A person cannot silence landline phones. After all, not really. Not the way they do mobile phones at night. Maybe someone has called me already. Someone with the most awful news I did not hear. Connie does not have a landline either. She may not even answer now, or worse, she may not be no longer able to. I shudder, picking up the device. No missed calls. I turn on the sound and begin to flip through my contacts, squinting in the dark. Connie will answer, I think, and she will be upset that I woke her for nothing. She will say that the children are asleep, and she just checked on them. Howard is out cold beside her, and yes, she is positive, sure, 100% certain, that she can see the rhythm of his chest, up and down. He is breathing. He is breathing, and he has work in the morning. And so, I really should not bother them so early. There is nothing to worry about, and she will visit me soon, and we will get our toes done together, the pair of us. It must be the storm, she will say, the storm riling me up. Connie has always thought I worry too much, though, and maybe I do. I place the phone back down. I will not call her, I think. I have nothing to fret over. The phone has not rung. No one has called. And they always do it so tactfully, in hushed voices, as if the most terrible part of the announcement is in the waking. Oh, So sorry for disturbing you, ma'am. I stare at the phone again. I wait. It does not ring. I hover a hand over it, but I do not pick it up to make the call. I should not disturb her. But someone has died. Of this, I am certain. My father died when I was 6 years old. I first felt this peculiar nauseous feeling, the sensation of knowing, as I lay in a bed much smaller than this one, with a delicate white metal headboard wrought into the shape of flowers. I awoke and stared at the ceiling, taking a long, labored breath and pulling the heavy comforter up to my chin, just as I always did to fight off the wind that could fill a room in winter months. It rattled the windows, and it rattled me, shaking my very bones as I rolled over to look at the little toy chest across the room. It had been gifted to me by some distant cousin when I was very, very young, too young to recall the party, but it had sat there for as long as I could remember, as if it had always existed there alongside me. It now sat properly shut for the night. But when that sensation came for the first time, this indisputable, terrible stone in my gullet, softly, as not to disturb my parents, I pulled myself upward to sit atop the mattress, and crawling to the floor, I crept inch by inch across the room, my hair dangling over my face. I pause above the toy box, and I stare down at it. And for reasons I even now cannot dare say, I open the lid. I do not know how my father got inside, but I saw his bulging, bloodshot eye staring up at me in the dark, the rest of his swollen features obscured and buried by the clutter, a baby doll whose own hinged eyes had broken, forever open, a spinning top, a velveteen teddy bear, an assemblage of blocks. My father's eye looked up at me from beneath them all. It blinked. And at last he said my name, in a voice hoarse, a hollow, splintered noise, uttered through unseen lips from the very depths of his ravaged throat. The worst noise I had ever heard. I ran, and from the upper railing, my face placed flush between the wooden rods, I found my mother standing in the front hallway, clad in her checkered nightgown. She wore her hair in curlers then, and pressed up against a dark wall-papered wall, she stared at the telephone in the alcove by the door. She stared, and I stared at her staring, and I know now she knew like I know. But most people can tell. I think, even if they do not realize it, they pick up on the chillness of the air and the lateness of the hour, an unnatural flicker of a piece of fabric, these tiny signs that something is amiss, that the universe has shifted. They create in a person with enough sense to see a terrible, sinking, heavy feeling. And finally, the phone rang. Some time later, my mother found me huddled by the doorway to my bedroom. I did not dare go back in, but I had retreated there to cower after a few minutes of listening. She smoked a cigarette as she told me, a nervous habit people still did around their kids then. But I already knew. Of course, I knew that my father had died. I learned later, not from my mother, that a towering industrial shelf in his warehouse had collapsed, and he had been buried by its contents. And I had found him just like that, entombed in my toy box. Some grotesque phantom vision caught, like a crude, blurry snapshot of the moment of his death. But he was not there when my mother closed the chest again that night, and he did not return. The feeling, however, had been there. This terrible sensation of knowing, the awareness of a death. I had felt it then, and I feel it now. I really should call Connie, I think. I pick up the phone as I look down at it. My finger hovers over the lock, but I do not press it down. I should not bother her. Instead, I tuck the device back in place, and I rise from the bed. I rise if compelled. I move for the closet. The mighty wooden armoire perched right beside the window, where the rain still pattered. I stare at it and reach out a hand, but I hesitate. I hesitate because that if I open it, I might find someone staring back. A rotted specter come to visit, because perhaps it did not know where else to go. I do not deign to know the motives of decaying ghosts. And I still, even now, do not know why I saw my father that night. Only that at his funeral I cried, because they had once again put him in a box. And maybe that was it, after all, the soul's search for a box in which to be put, now that its fleshy container had loosed it. With a bracing breath, I grab the golden knobs. I should go back to bed. I should not open it, because if I do, I may regret it. But if I do not open it, I will have to sit here and wait and stare at the phone until it begins to ring, which I, of course, know it will. And so, closing my eyes, rearing my head, so that I might not have to look, I grasp the handles, and I tug. I tug the armoire open. I dare not peek. I count to 3 in my head, and in the very back of my mind, I can see Connie now. I think of her as a child in a red dress we had bought her for Christmas. I should like to remember her that way, I think. Not now as how I remember my father. Not as a faceless, blackened eye in a box. I turn back my head. I take another breath, and I open my eyes. I see clothing, and only clothing. A closet full of patterned blouses and dresses. I have so few opportunities to wear. But I will have to pick something now, in black, for the services, I think, for whichever one I have to attend. Not that one, though, but maybe this one. I decide, reaching out to run my fingers along the edges of the dark, colored dress with silver buttons down its back. No, maybe not. Reaching into the armoire again, I pull out a dress with a low waist and a black rose stitched on the hip. I could wear it with the silver chain my husband bought me. I think the one with the silver charms. That may be a bit too garish, too bold for such a grim occasion. No, I think I could wear it with my mother's pearls. They are more understated. I had known it when she died too, but she had not gone suddenly. No, not like a lamp abruptly turned out before the dark. Her own end had come gradually, like the waning glow of sunset, bit by bit, until cold night could be the only natural expected conclusion. The phone rang in the middle of the afternoon that day, when I had been folding laundry, the weight of knowing in my stomach. The hospital had told us to go home and rest that morning, and that they would call if anything changed. But something had indeed changed before they decided to tell us. I wandered into the kitchen that day to find Connie, already with the telephone's cord jumbled around her elbow, and I knew for certain. I should call Connie now, I think. I should have her check on Howard and the children. No, it would wake them. They would be upset. And really, it's just as likely to be a co-worker or someone from the church. These thoughts brought me no comfort. But still, wrapped in them, like a terrible frayed quilt, I reached into the closet once more, shifting through the row of heavy clothing, in search of a long-sleeved dress with the belt, the one I will wear to the funeral, I think. It might be the proper choice between the options I had, because I had worn it to my husband's funeral. I was alone in bed the night Richard died. I had been working late, as he so often did, and I had fallen asleep early with the television on, lulled by the lullaby of commercials and rain. I awoke, as if from a nightmare, to find an infomercial about a countertop grill just starting. That feeling once again took hold as I rolled over to check the alarm clock, blinking red. And I lay there for a good while, watching my phone curled up in a ball beneath the covers, as some sports star extolled the virtues of a sleek design and grease traps. The phone rang at 2:27 in the morning, and it was on the third chime that I felt a sudden shift in the bed beside me. A ragged, heavy breath ghosted my ear, hot and garbled, the way a person chokes. The familiar weight of an arm stretched over to wrap round my shoulder. The exhaling came, and again, and again, a steady labored noise, rattling in some phantom throat. I dare not turn around. I wish now that I had, but I had not. I stared forward. I dared not blink. I picked up my cell phone, plugged into the wall there. Hello? There's water in the car, Cass. Oh God, there's so much water in the car. Let out a long breath at Richard's voice, distorted by static, and all at once the bed was empty again, and only silence was ringing in my ear. A police officer told me a few days later that his little silver Ford had been caught in a sudden storm, and he had swerved too hard being around a bend in the road. He had died from the collision when the vehicle hit the water. That's what they said. And the drop was too high for any other possibility, of course. So, at least, he did not drown. Something said to me as if it were a genuine comfort. And he had not been conscious to see the water filling his car. They did not find his phone. I should call Connie. I cannot take this any more. Turning from the armoire, I moved once more for the bed, for my telephone still plugged in the wall, perched there at the end table. I stare, and it rings, and I screamed. I can recall, even from where I am now, that it was a full, horrible noise, hurled from the very depths of my stomach, as if I were finally letting that terrible great stone out, the one that had been sitting there within it. The echoes from the very core of me, but I did not answer the phone. My neighbor in the apartment next door is a nice young man. He has shaggy hair and an earring. He checks on me from time to time. I stir him from my sleep with my wailing, and he will, in a few moments from now, come to knock on my door. I do not answer, because I am picking up the telephone to see that I have missed a call from Connie. And shaking there my dark bedroom as he knocks, I decide to dial her again. My neighbor will call the police, and he will tell them he heard me scream a little bit after 3 in the morning. He will tell the same story still, for many, many years to come, whispered around darkened tables and across occasional campfires. The police will call Connie. She will tell them she had been lying awake all night herself, tossing and turning with a great heavy weight in her stomach. She will tell me that she called me even when she can no longer bear it, but I did not answer, even though her own phone will ring a few seconds later. She will answer, to only hear her own name, she will say, uttered desperately through a flurry of static. But there will be no record of that call. They will not believe her, citing technical glitches or tricks played by fear. And when they break down my door, they will think I had fallen asleep with my armoire doors open and my glasses on the floor. But they will find me just as I found myself, blue-faced, breathless, covered still by the mound of blankets in my own empty bed, where I had laid motionless for hours by then. Someone has died. Of this, I am certain. Someone has died. And, oh God, it is I. That is the story, Someone Has Died, as written by Lonnie Russo. This one is called Something Walks Whistling Past My House Every Night. Every night, no matter the weather, something walks down our street whistling softly. You can only hear it if you're in the living room or kitchen when they walk by, and it always starts exactly at 3:03. The sound starts faint, somewhere near the beginning of the lane near the Carson place. We're towards the middle of the street, so the whistling moves past us before fading in the direction of the cul-de-sac. When I was younger, my sister and I would sneak into the kitchen some nights to listen. Mom and Dad didn't like that and we would catch hell if they found us. But they were never too hard on us, since we always stuck to the one big rule. Don't try to look at whatever was whistling. My neighborhood is a funny place. I've lived here since I was 6, and I love it. The houses are small, but well kept. Good-sized yards, plenty of places to roam. There are lots of other kids here my age. I turned 13 back in October. We grew up together and would always play foursquare in the cul-de-sac, or roam around from the back porch to back porch in the summer. This was a good place to grow up. Now I'm old enough to see it. And there's two strange things here: the night whistling and the good luck. The whistling never bothered me much. Like I said, I couldn't even hear it from my bedroom. But Mom and Dad don't like talking about it, so I've stopped asking questions. My dad is a strong guy, tall and calm. He has an accent since he moved here to the U.S. as a kid. His family, my grandparents, they're from the islands. That's what they call it. My dad, the only time he isn't so calm is if the whistler comes up. He talks a little quicker then, eyes move a little faster. And he tells us not to think about it so much, and to always remember the one rule, the big rule. Don't try to look outside when the whistler goes past. Not that we could look, even if we wanted. You see, there are shutters on the inside of every window, thick pieces of heavy canvas that pull down from the top and latch to the bottom of the window frame. Each latch even has a small lock, about the size of what you would find on a diary. My dad locks those shutters every night before we all go to bed and keeps the key in his room. My mom, I don't know what she thinks of the whistling. I've seen her out in the living room before at 3:03 when the sound starts. I could see her if I cracked my door open just an inch to peek. She's not out there often. At least I haven't caught her much. But once or twice a month, I think she sits out there in our big red couch, just listening. The whistler has the same tune every night. It's a cheerful one. Remember how I said there's two odd things about where I live? Well, besides our night whistler, everyone in my neighborhood is really lucky. It's hard to explain. My dad doesn't like us talking about this part much either. But good things just seem to happen to people around here a lot. Usually it's small things, winning a radio contest, or getting that unexpected promotion at work, finding some arrowheads in the backyard. You know, the authentic kind. The weather is pretty good. There's no crime. Everybody's gardens bloom extra bright in the fall. A million little blessings, I've heard my mom say about living here. But the main reason we stay here, and the one why we moved here in the first place, is my sister Nola. She was born very sick, something with her lungs. We couldn't even bring her home when she was born, only visit her in the hospital. She was so small, I remember. Small, even compared to the other babies. A machine had to breathe for her. We moved into our house here to be closer to the hospital. As soon as we moved here, Nola started getting better. The doctors couldn't figure it out. They chalked it up to whatever they were doing, but we all could tell they were confused. But my parents knew. Even I knew. Nola getting better was just another of the million little blessings we got for living in our neighborhood. So that's why we stayed. Even after we found out that, for every small miracle that happens here, every day, now and then, some bad things happen. But they only happen if you look for the whistler. Our neighborhood has a welcoming committee. They showed up with a macaroni casserole and a gift basket and a manila folder whenever someone moves in. They're very friendly. 4 people showed up when we moved in 7 years ago. The committee made small talk, gave me a Snickers bar, and took turns holding Nola. It was her first week out of the hospital, so they were extra careful. Then the committee asked to speak to my parents in private, so I was sent to my room, where I still managed to hear nearly every word. The welcoming committee told my parents about how nice the neighborhood was. Really exceptional. Hard to explain kind of nice. And they told my parents about the even harder to explain whistling that happened every morning at 3:03 and ended at the tick of 3:05. The group, our new neighbors, warned my parents that the whistling was quiet, would never harm or hurt us, as long as we didn't look for what was making the sound. This part they stressed, and I pushed my ear into the door, straining to hear them. People who went looking for the whistler had their luck change, sometimes tragically. A black cloud would hang over anyone that looked. Anything that could go wrong would. The manila envelope the committee brought over contained newspaper clippings, stories about car crashes and ruined lives, public deaths and freak accidents. Not everyone dies, I heard the head of the committee tell my dad, but the life goes out of them. Even if they live, there's no light in them ever again. No presence. My mom, I could tell, wasn't taking it seriously. She kept asking if this was some prank they planned their new neighbors. At one point, my mom got angry and accused the committee of trying to scare us out of our new home. Asked them if they were racist on account of my dad being from the islands. My dad calmed her down, told her he could tell her new neighbors were sincere, and they were just trying to help us. He explained that he grew up hearing these kind of stories from his mom, that she knew there were strange things that walked among us. Some of those strange things were good. Some were bad. Most were just different. After the committee left, Dad went out to the hardware store and bought the canvas blinds, latches, and locks. Installed them on every window in the house after dinner. That first night in our new house, I crept out of my room at 3 a.m., only to find my dad awake, sitting on the living room couch, holding my baby sister. My dad held his finger up in a shush motion, but patted the couch next to him. I sat and we waited. At exactly 3:03 we heard the whistling. It came and it went, just like our neighbors said. The whistling returns each night, and we never look. And we enjoy our million little blessings every day. Nola breathes on her own, and she's grown into a strong, clever girl. My dad even joined the welcoming committee. We don't get new neighbors often. Why would anyone want to leave? But when a new family moves in, my dad and the committee bring them a macaroni casserole, a gift basket, and the manila folder. I can always tell by the look on my dad's face when he comes back if the family took the committee seriously, or if we would be getting new neighbors again very soon. Not long ago, a family moved in directly next to us. The previous owner, Mrs. Maddie, passed away at 105. She'd lived a good, long life. Our new neighbors seemed like they would fit in just fine. They had believed the welcoming committee and took my dad's advice about locking the shutters since they had a young child of their own. Whatever newspaper clippings were in that manila envelope, whatever evidence, my dad never let us see. But I imagine it must have been awfully convincing, since our neighbors got along with no issues for the first month. One night, when our new neighbors had to leave town, they sent their son, Holden, to stay with us. He was 12, a year under me in school. I didn't know him well before that night, but as soon as his parents dropped him off after dinner, I could tell it was going to be a bad time. Do you know who is always out there whistling every night? Holden asked the moment the adults left the room. The three of us were sitting in the den, some Disney movies playing idly in the television. My sister and I exchanged a glance. We don't talk about that, I said. I think it's the weirdo that lives in the big yellow house in the corner, Holden said. Mr. Tolles? My sister asked. No way, he's really nice. Holden shrugged. Must be a psycho killer then. Nola tensed. We don't talk about it, I repeated. Let's go into my room and play Nintendo. We spent the next few hours playing games, eating popcorn, and then watching movies. A typical sleepover, but I could tell Holden was getting antsy. After my parents had wished us a good night, locked the blinds, and gone to bed, Holden stood up from his beanbag and walked over to where Nola and I were sitting on my bed. Have you ever tried looking? He asked. It's nearly time. Like most sleepovers, we conveniently ignored any suggestion of a bedtime. And I was shocked to see he was right. It was almost 3 a.m. I sighed. We don't. See, I can't. I can't even try to look because my dad locks the blinds every night and hides the key. He continued, ignoring me. So does our dad, said Nola. No, replied Holden. No, he doesn't. You saw him do it, I said, a little sharper than I had meant to sound. Holden grinned. Your dad locks the blinds, yeah, but he doesn't hide the key. He keeps it on his keychain. So? I asked, worried. I already knew what he would say next, because I had noticed that my dad didn't bother hiding the key anymore after all these years, because he knew we took it seriously. So after your dad locked up before your parents went to bed, I went to the bathroom. And on my way, I might have peeked into the room, and might have seen your dad's key and his chain on his nightstand, and maybe I went and borrowed the key to the blinds. Nola and I stared, and his grin grew wider. "You're lying," I said. Holden shrugged. "You can check if you want. Just open your parents' door and look. You'll see his keychain right there in the nightstand." "Stay here," I told both of them. "Don't move a muscle." I hurried over to my parents' room, but hesitated at the door. If Holden wasn't lying, my dad would be angry. Beyond angry. I was scared thinking about it, but more scared of an open window with the Whistler right outside. I opened the door barely an inch and looked in, but it was too dark to see. Taking a deep breath, I walked into the room. 2 steps in, I froze. The whistling had started. I could hear it clearly from my parents' room. I never realized they must have heard the sound every night since we moved into the house. They never told us. I don't think I could have slept through it. I stood there listening to the whistling coming closer, unsure whether I should turn on a light or call out for my dad. Soft sounds from the living room brought me back to reality. "Nola!" I yelled, running out of my parents' room. Holden and Nola were standing near the front door, next to a window. Holden wasn't lying. I could see him fumbling with the lock on the blinds. I heard a click. He did have the key. Holden let out a quick laugh. Nola stood next to him, hunched up, afraid but maybe curious. The whistling was right outside our house now. I think I made a sound. Called out. I can't remember. Time felt frozen. Clock hands nailed to the face. But I found myself moving. I'm not fast. I've never been athletic. Somehow, though, I covered the space between myself and Nola in a moment. My eyes were locked on her, but I heard Holden pull the blind all the way down so it could release. I heard the snap of it start to raise, and I heard the whistling just on the other side of the window. I had my arms around Nola, and I turned her so she was facing away from the window. At the same time, I jammed my eyes shut. The blind whipped open. The whistling stopped. I felt Nola shaking in my arms. "Don't look," I told her. "Don't turn around." We were positioned so she was facing back towards the hallway, and I was facing the window. My eyes were still closed. I felt her nod into my shoulder. I reached out with an arm, not holding Nola, and tried to touch Holden. My hand brushed against his arm. He was shaking worse than Nola. "Holden?" I asked. Silence returned to me. I reached past him and gingerly felt for the window, eyes sealed shut. The glass was cold against my fingertips, colder than it should have been for this time of year. I moved my hand up the window, searching for the string to the blind. The glass began to get warmer the further I reached up. There was a gentle hum feeding back into my fingertips. I tried not to think about what might be on the other side of the window. Finally, I touched the string and yanked the blinds shut. I opened my eyes. In the dim light leaking out from the kitchen, I could make out Holden, pale and small, staring at the now closed window. "Holden," I asked again. He turned towards me, and he screamed. Everything became a flurry of motion. Lights sparked to life in the hall, then the living room. My parents' footsteps thudded across the hardwood floor. I didn't turn to look back at them. My eyes were glued to Holden. He was pale. He had bit his lip so hard there was a thin red line of blood running down his chin, and he had wet himself. "What happened?" my dad asked from behind me. I managed to swivel away from Holden and look back. He looked. I have never seen my dad scared before, but I saw it that night. And in that moment, an old, ugly terror stitched on his face. A parent's fear. "Just Holden?" he mouthed to me. I nodded yes. My dad let out a breath. He looked so relieved I nearly expected him to cheer. But then he turned to Holden, and my dad's face changed. I wondered if he felt bad for feeling good that Holden was the only one that had looked. There was a knock at the door. We all froze. Holden whimpered. "Don't answer it," my mom said. She stood at the threshold of the hall. I always thought she was a skeptic, just humored my dad about the windows and the whistler. But that night we were all believers. I noticed that both my parents held baseball bats they must have taken from their bedroom. The knock came again, a little louder this time. "Please don't open the door," Holden whispered. My dad walked over to him and hugged him close. "We won't," my dad promised, still holding his bat. "Nothing is coming in here tonight." Thud, thud, thud. This time the knocking was loud enough to rattle the door. Holden screamed again, and Nola clutched her arms around my neck. My mom came over and knelt down next to us, wrapping my sister and me close. Thud, thud, thud. "Call the police," my mom whispered to my dad. The knocking instantly stopped. My dad looked over his shoulder at us. "Do you think—" He was cut off by frantic knocking that trailed off into a polite tap, tap, tap. "Police," something said from the other side of the door. The voice from outside sounded exactly like my mom, like a parrot repeating the words back to her. "Police. Call the police." Tap, tap, tap. "Police." My mom pulled us closer. "Police? Police?" "Please stop," I heard her whisper. "I don't think calling them will help," my dad said. "How will we even know when they're the ones at the other side of the door?" The knocking came back harder than before. The door shook, and it stopped. After a long moment, I heard the knocking again, but it was coming from our back door. We all turned together towards the back door, but the knocking immediately returned to the front door. Front to back, back to front. Loud and then quiet, and then loud again. Suddenly the sound was coming from both doors at once. Big, heavy blows like a sledgehammer. Then something started rapping against all of the windows in the house. Then the walls. It was like we were living inside a drum, or a dozen people trying to play it at once. Or we were a turtle and something was attempting to claw us out of our shell. "Stop!" Holden yelled. The knocking died. "I won't tell," Holden said, staring at the door. "I promise I won't tell anyone what I saw. Just please go away." We waited for nearly a minute when we heard it. A soft tap, 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 coming from the window Holden had looked through earlier. Holden started to cry, sobbing like a prisoner watching the gallows being built outside their cell. My dad held him, brushed his hair out of his face, but he did not lie to him. He never told him things would be okay. The tapping at the window went on for the rest of the night. We huddled together in the living room for I don't know how long. Eventually, my mom tried to take us kids into my room while my dad stayed to watch the door. But the second we moved into my bedroom, the knocking came back, so loud it was impossible to ignore, and I was afraid the door wouldn't be able to take it. When we went back to the living room, the knocking stopped. Only the tap, tap, tap on the window remained. None of us slept that night. The tapping stopped around 7 a.m. It's about the time the sun came up. We waited another 2 hours before my dad opened the blinds from one window. He made us all go back to my parents' bedroom first. I heard him open the door and then come back in. "Okay," he told us. "It's done." Holden's parents came back around lunchtime. My mom and my dad walked Holden over to his house, and they all went inside for quite a while. Nola and I watched from the window. She stuck to me the whole day, right at my side, sometimes holding my hand. When my parents came back, they looked grim, but wouldn't tell us what they said to Holden's family. It was a Sunday, so we all spent the day together, ordered pizza, and watched movies. That night, everyone slept in my room. Nola and my mom in the bed with me, and my dad in a chair he'd pulled over. There was no knocking that night, or any night since. We didn't see much of Holden or his parents for the rest of that week, but by Thursday there was a moving truck in their driveway. Nola and I watched them pack up the whole afternoon after school. What sticks most with me is how tired Holden and his parents looked. All three had the same pallor, grim mouths, and lightless eyes. Even from across the street, I could tell something was very wrong. Holden and his family were gone before sunset. I remember what the original welcoming committee said to my parents when we moved in. Not everyone who looks at the Whistler dies, but even those that live have the light go out from them, and for the rest of their lives are full of misfortune. A million little tragedies. I think Holden's parents must have looked, either to comfort him if they didn't believe, or share the burden if they did. I watch Nola some days, happy and young and alive, and I wonder if I had been slower, if she had looked out the window that night, would I have looked too to comfort her, to share that burden? I'm glad I didn't have to find out. We still live in that house, in that neighborhood. We still hear our Whistler walking past every night. The blessings, the luck, the good things here are too good to leave. But we're careful. We don't have friends over to spend the night anymore. And my dad hides the keys to the blinds very, very well. Not that I've gone looking. Some things you just don't need to look for. And that is the story. Something walks whistling past my house every night.